Yeah, I think that they are slowly but surely driving him insane over this road issue.
I just feel he didn't want to go along with the law. He just was, what do you call it, nonconformist, you see, in more ways than one.
You either own the road or you don't own the road. You can't have it both ways. It's not fair.
They could have walked in, you know.
Do you know where you are? This is my private property.
But if you go back in the history of this road, there are any number of places where they could come up with justification for this being private property.
I used to be on that road when I was 13 to 14 years old, many years ago, 40 years ago or more. I used to go there hunting all the time, my father and I, and we always used the road and never had no trouble. So, I mean, and it's open to the public. Everybody knew it.
The situation that is left is that the public can use a road but is not obligated to contribute or pay for its maintenance. That system may not be the fairest system that could exist, but it's the system that the legislature set up.
Beside Hales Pond at the foot of Oak Hill, in Central Maine's Lakes District, in the forested foothills of the Appalachian, is the battleground of a 30-year-long war.
The money damage awards that the court has found against us have been a real hardship on us. Just when we thought that we were going to have enough money to actually get into the house trailer, the other house trailer, they took it all out from under us.
$15,000 to people who are not well off is a significant penalty, and 10 days in jail is a noticeable amount of imprisonment.
On top of that, there's the jail sentence. David kind of feels like a prisoner here. He doesn't feel that he can leave or travel or anything of the sort until he's served the time that they say he owes.
I'm organizing a suit for fraud, for discrimination, for taking of private property for a public purpose with no intention whatsoever of compensating, and requiring people to work for nothing without first convicting them of a crime or getting an agreement with them to do it.
It is a war waged by David and Roberta Manter against government.
At one point during the time that we were waiting for the decision to come down on the Baker case, my husband got so frustrated with it that he finally took a no trespassing sign, tacked it on a piece of strapping, and stuck it in the middle of the road just up at our north property line, saying private property, no trespassing.
Obstructing a public roadway is a criminal offense. David Manter would receive 10 days in jail for his crime. But back when he launched the opening skirmish in what would become a lifelong war, he was still a single man.
In the early 70s, this is the place to which I had moved. When I first saw it, there was grass probably up to about my waist, and half of the yard was full of daylilies. It was that narrow, brush growing over it, grass growing up in it, and you had to look to find the road. Having been a veteran of Vietnam era, I was looking to get away from it all. Well, you can't do that in Fayette, Maine.
At first, he hadn't asked any questions at all about the overgrown road that led to his cottage. When he lived, he did. A newspaper article, as well as minutes from the meeting, report that new resident David Manter inquired at a Fayette Selectmen's meeting about the legal status of the road he had bought property on. Selectmen moved to inquire of the town's attorney whether the town held a right-of-way to the road. At the town office, he would later claim, he had been told that Fayette didn't have anything to do with that road. So he'd begun fixing it up. It was how he got to and from his property. Probably few in town even knew what the term public easement meant, or if they did, whether the young road was one. Certainly, no one told David Manter. Believing it was private, Manter, on a slender income with no telephone, had begun hauling gravel onto the road. Then heavy logging trucks came in to log nearby land. Now, anyone who lives in a climate like Maine's knows that in mud season, if you drive a heavy vehicle over frozen mud, it breaks down the weakened ice crystals and can drive deep ruts into the road that you then have to fill in with even more gravel. Manter didn't want his hard work ruined. A town would have posted the road. A paper company would have put up gates. Manter parked the truck in front of the road in mud season.
I was asked to look into the status of the road, and I concluded, based on the county commissioner's vote in 1945, and based on the lack of maintenance for 30 years, that it had been discontinued as a public road, but it was still open to the use by the public.
Finally, one mud season, unable to get to and from his little cottage, Manter moved out of state until his road dried up. There, he met his wife-to-be, Roberta, and brought her back to Maine with him. They would have one child, a daughter.
If I had my way, I'd leave here today. I would leave in a hurry. I'd find me a place where I could stay and not have to worry. A place I could use, a place I could lose.
James Young, Turner Swift, Isaac Norris. Yankee pioneers like these 1795 Fayette settlers had sought out places like Oak Hill, above the shadowy lowland valleys, because the growing season was longer there. They named the town in honor of the Frenchman who'd helped their revolutionary cause, General de Lafayette. I've often wondered if another reason why those Yankee farmers sought out hilltops like Oak Hill was because here you look across to a neighboring farmstead. On a clear day, you can see Mount Washington off in the distance. One day, David and Roberta Manter were on a trip up Oak Hill when they came upon a developer widening the road. A few days later, the flattened forest floor gave evidence that a summer storm surge had sent volumes of phosphorus-laden water down the drainage channels and into the lake. That fall, just a gentle warning perhaps, thin layers of algae floated on Hale's Pond. Not the kind of algae that grows suspended in water, but the kind that feeds on phosphorus on the lake floor, an indication that a lake is under stress. Roberta and David Manter joined a volunteer organization that monitors water quality in Maine. By looking down a tube at a disc suspended into the pond at its deepest place, they measure water quality. They gather the data for Hale's Pond. It's the only way they have of alerting government to the threat environmental degradation on Oak Hill poses to the whole chain of life around the pond.
So 8, what's today, the 16th?
Don Witherell had gone over to the top of Oak Hill to look at the situation there.
The problem then is who actually does maintain these, and unfortunately the answer is often nobody's maintaining them. And that's something that we are going to have to get a handle on, because so many of these roads are chronic erosion problems that every year they may end up washing out, and then somebody comes along and adds another dump truck load of gravel, and they continue on in that fashion. But the problem is that they're a continual source, and it's a cumulative effect over time that they continue to contribute that sediment to the lake, which adds more phosphorus and then continues that accelerated eutrophication process that we're so concerned about.
It's summer, and Fayette is busy now. Four-wheel drive vehicles pull up to the pumps in front of the store. No longer the lightweight little carts and buggies that brought people into town well into the beginning of the 20th century and took far less of a toll on the roads. The Revolutionary War soldiers brought with them a taste for representative government. They elected selectmen, and they held an annual town meeting. Fayette grew by 1850 to a population of over 1,000. But as early as 1851, an article on the town warrant asked voters to approve the discontinuance of part of the road over Oak Hill. As the farm economy gave way to a manufacturing economy, and as people left to go fight the Civil War, Fayette's tax base dwindled. And why maintain a road nobody uses? By the time the Depression hit, Fayette's population was less than 200 people. And so those New England farm families' triumphant achievements, the attached farmhouses and barns meant to serve generations to come, now stood empty. In Fayette, and this is not unusual for a small New England town, many municipal records were lost, including the results of a 1905 warrant article to discontinue the Young Road. A lot of history happened between 1945 and the 1970s when David Manter moved onto the Young Road, but none of it happened there. It had grown back to woods. But now he was living there with his family. Just maintaining the mile of road was a tremendous strain on his family resources. But what would happen when he went to the courts for relief was even worse.
I had known when we were married that it was going to mean 20 years of struggle and heartache. If I'd known the physical and financial and emotional toll that this was going to put on us for the next 20 years, I would never have moved back up here. We started with a petition to the county commissioners asking them to force the town to maintain the road. And the town at that point came in with their attorney and represented their position as being that the road was discontinued in 1945. We did feel that if it was no longer a road, that our taxes should be abated. So we went to the selectmen's meeting the following week and said, okay, can we have an abatement in our taxes since we're now legally landlocked? The town said, oh, you're not landlocked. You have property on the Young Road, and the Young Road leads to your property, and therefore you're not landlocked.
So the town argued, number one, that it was a public easement because that's what the county commissioners established it as in 1945. And secondly, it was a public easement because it hadn't been maintained by the town for 30 years. So the town made those alternative claims, which are not necessarily inconsistent. They end up with the same result, that it's a public easement.
Well, the lower court said that the road was abandoned, but we appealed to the Maine Supreme Court, and they said that it would have been proper to look at the 1945 order first. If we had known at the time, what we probably should have done was to ask for a declaratory judgment on the status of the road based on a claim of common law abandonment. Because common law abandonment, no easement was retained, and there was plenty of evidence that we could have brought in if we'd known to prove that the road was abandoned long before the statutory abandonment became available. And the Maine Supreme Court ended up determining, without any of the information, that the 1945 order had retained an easement.
That decision was never appealed by the people who, any of the people who lived on the Young Road or owned property at that time. So it became final. In other words, the law says that you got to have finality to all decisions. At some point, you got to be able to rely on a decision so that it can't be changed anymore. And certainly, from 1945 to they started challenging it in the mid-'80s, 40 years, you can't challenge something that happened 40 years ago. That's what the law court was saying.
Hugh Calkins is Director of Training and Resources at Pine Tree Legal Assistance. Could the Manters have gotten help there?
Because we can't possibly help everybody who's financially eligible with all of their legal problems. So we set the priorities so that we spend our time and our effort on the cases that are most important. We increasingly are trying to provide information and self-help assistance to people who are representing themselves. It's almost impossible to provide some sort of general piece of pro se or self-help information that would apply to road cases across the boards. Those cases almost always need individual attention and are based on unique circumstances. So probably we would never provide any information that would be helpful to people in a road law case.
If somebody were about to buy land burdened by a public easement, I would advise them to treat the public easement in many ways as though it were a public way, that you may not prevent the public from traveling the road, whether by foot or in a vehicle or for almost any purpose. Therefore, you have to understand there'll be some lessening of your privacy interest.
After the Maine Supreme Court said that the road was a public easement, we appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. We knew there wasn't much chance of their listening to it because they pick and choose what cases they'll hear. But we were hoping that they would consider it. What happens on a private way or a public easement is that every time they use that access, they destroy it again. You put your labor, your materials, your time and effort into maintaining the road, and then the public comes in and uses it up, and they've taken your access again.
Yeah, after the Manters lost before the Maine Supreme Court, they filed a petition for a writ of certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court, asking the U.S. Supreme Court to take their appeal. And predictably, it was turned down. Almost all such petitions are turned down because the U.S. Supreme Court only takes cases that have national significance.
Both sides had spent a great deal of time in court over a matter that had started with a truck parked across the road in mud season. They would spend more time, and still, there would be no resolution. Fayette couldn't have found out whether the Young Road was a public easement from the Maine Municipal Association. The answer was buried in town records.
We received many calls about roads, and given the turnover in municipal officials, it's very common to get town officials asking, what is a public easement? What we tell them is that it's often what's left over after a townway has been discontinued or abandoned. The public has the right to go over the road, but the town does not have the obligation to maintain the public easement. Back in 1945, if a town wanted to discontinue a townway, automatically the public rights would disappear. The town had to specifically reserve the public easement if it wanted to retain it. Otherwise, there would be no other public right left after discontinuance. That changed in 1965. After September 3 of 1965, if a town discontinues a townway, there automatically is a public easement retained unless the town specifies otherwise. So it's been reversed as of 1965.
The Manters had been turned away by the highest court in the land. Now, where else to seek a remedy? Back in Fayette? Anger there was mounting. The town had had to spend taxpayer dollars, and still, the Manters felt as if they hadn't gotten a fair hearing. They decided to treat the road as if it were private.
Yes, I have, and I've verbally, more often than not, let people know, do you know where you are? This is my private property.
The case had been in the papers, and the public knew it was free to travel the road, and travel it they did.
The Supreme Court said that the road was open to unfettered use for the, that means everybody. So, and anybody that's, if you stop somebody there, you're violating their rights and you're threatening them.
John Baker, a logger who owned property on Oak Hill, claimed that he damaged his truck driving over a drainage ditch that Manter had dug.
It cost me a lot on my truck. My truck got going through the ditch, ruined my cross member and transmission lines got squeezed up so it wouldn't, and started leaking. And
in the event that somebody has an accident on the road, you may be sued because you own the land underneath it. You may or may not be found liable for damages, but depending on the circumstances, you can certainly be sued and you'll be responsible for the costs of your defense.
I filled the ditch in once, and he filled it back. He dug it back out. He filled it again. I filled it again, then he dug it back out. And the third time, we didn't fill it because it was in late October, and it froze, and you couldn't fill it back in with the dirt that was there. So it was like that all winter.
So we went to court, and Mr. Baker won that lawsuit. An injunction was issued against the Manters, prohibiting them from interfering with people's use of the Young Road. And originally, my client was awarded $5,000 in punitive damages. Punitive damages are awarded when the defendant's conduct has been particularly outrageous. The court found that the Manters' conduct over the years had been outrageous and awarded $5,000 in punitive damages. The Manters appealed because the court also awarded my client his attorney fees.
I'm not angry about it. I'm just angry. I'm unhappy. I'm not angry at anybody. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not that type of person. I just don't feel that if there's people up there making decisions, they have to accept it, whether they like it or not. That I have to do that, so why shouldn't he?
There have been 4 decisions by the Maine Supreme Court about the Young Road involving the Manters. That's unprecedented as far as I know. You know, ordinarily the Maine Supreme Court makes a decision and people abide by it, even if they're unhappy with it. The Manters have not.
Recently, the Manters acquired new neighbors on the Young Road, Eric Engelhardt and Katie Ives. Even without a formal road association, they nonetheless do share maintenance.
But I came to know the Manters just because I was bored and didn't know anything about constructing anything, and would go down and talk to them, and then I'd have conversations with Dave, and we have the same heritage, Scotch Welsh, and Eric, my significant other, just contributes to the road maintenance through whatever. If Dave needs money for gravel, he tells Eric that he's going to bring in several loads of gravel, and Eric gives him money towards gravel. I don't know how much or what, but I do know that he does contribute to it because I've seen him actually physically give over money, so I do know he contributes. And he also has a backhoe that he lets Dave use for the maintenance of the road, and that has helped a great deal because when I first came here, I think it's been about 7 years ago, they were just using rakes and shovels and stuff like that, so it was pretty hard to do.
Still, the dispute continued, and it grew. Now, property values were at stake. John Baker says he cannot sell his property because of the way the Manters have behaved. Another property owner along the easement says he cannot sell his because of the way the Manter property looks.
If somebody offers you their old car for $50 and it's got a bunch of parts in it you can use, you don't turn it down. Someday you might need a $100 part out of it. We've done that numerous times. We've got more value out of some of these old junkers as people see them. To us, that's our hope that we're going to be able to cope with things when something breaks down.
The town responded by sending selectmen in to investigate, accompanied by a state trooper. However, with no legal structure to require that he share responsibilities, the neighbor had not contributed to maintaining the very road that gave him access to his land. The Manters still tried to seek a legal solution. Attorney Katsafikas explains what options were open to them.
If you're on a public easement, there are really 2 options. One option would be to go approach the selectmen and ask to have an article put on the town meeting warrant to allow the town to be able to spend money to maintain that road. That's one option. The other option would be to ask the town to discontinue the public easement.
Would these processes work for the Manters in Fayette? Starling Hall has echoed to the sound of many voices debating the Young Road problem. Roberta Manter asked the Fayette selectmen to request that they look into the Young Road problem again. They did. Elaine Wilcox returned there to speak about the situation.
The public has been able to use the road and kind of ruin it after David and Roberta had put money into it and fix it up. It has a public easement, so there was no way to stop it. We wanted some kind of closure. That was the committee's plan, just to get some kind of closure. But this really didn't create a closure unless they proceed with what was recommended.
When the town offered the solutions to us, they were asking us to do a lot of work and probably to do something that was impossible. We've asked some of the abutters before to pitch in on the maintenance, and with only one or two exceptions, they have refused. They know they've got a good thing going. As long as we live here, we have to maintain it because we need the access. We need to be able to get in and out. So they just sit back and wait for us to maintain it, and when we've got it in good shape, then they use it.
By tracking down names in public documents and placing announcements in local newspapers, Roberta Manter organized an association she calls Roadways. Many in it maintain public easements. The Manters have argued for giving public easement maintainers the same ability private road associations have to gain compliance from recalcitrant abutters. They have recommended that future discontinuances result in private easements in common to the abutters.
Roadway's proposal for a fairly simple solution to all this is that when you discontinue a road, if it's going to result in any property being landlocked, that the thing to do rather than keeping a public easement is to keep a private easement common to the abutters, so that those abutters could set up a road association and each of them could pitch in on the fair share of maintenance of the road. But then you wouldn't have the public coming in and using the road up and having no obligation whatever to put anything into maintenance. You wouldn't be landlocking anybody because each of the abutters would still have their share in the private easement, but the amount of use of the road would be cut back drastically because you wouldn't have all that public use of the road too. Step in the right direction to say that they can't automatically keep a public easement.
Still, the legislature has killed all the bills Roadways supported.
What the town or municipality would be doing is taking property, a property right of way, over one person's property to benefit other private parties along that former public easement. It would have to pay to take that private right. And yet the payment would be to allow a private individual to get to his or her property, not the public. That would violate the public purpose doctrine because public money would be being spent for a private purpose and not for the public purpose.
The Manters insist that separating rights and responsibilities in order to create public easements was wrong from the start. They do not think the government should continue to create easements, and they think laws governing existing easements should be changed. Are they alone?
I don't think that there is a simple solution that the laws can have to this. The problem is that we're dealing with hundreds of years of informal government action and action by individuals and rights and expectations that have evolved from those actions. And there's really no simple solution to it. Very often it's impossible to find those records. So the rights of the public, the rights of private people on certain roads are unclear. And faced with this, the legislature has a number of times studied the whole structure of road statutes and made changes over the years. But there isn't a great deal that they can do.
Beyond those issues, though, there are certainly environmental impacts caused by the physical existence of the roadbed itself. There are issues related to runoff caused by building a road. There are issues created when a road has to be repaired or maintained. All of these things have an environmental impact.
As you can see here, the rate of change, how the process takes place. Look at the undercutting. See, under this stump here. These are live trees, and they're being undercut, and eventually will collapse into the road itself. And it creates a dam and a diversion, only to accelerate the process even more. Here we have up to 200 feet of accelerated gully erosion. To restore it with stone-lined channelization and stabilization work, it's going to cost us over $10,000 to make this, restore this and get it stabilized. We have many, many countless miles of these roads all over our state. Many of them are in watersheds that lead into lakes and streams. They're also affecting downstream landowners, and as our population grows and more pressure to use the land continues, these roads are going to have more demand on them in many ways. And as we wait in time, as we try to sweep the problem under the rug by ignoring it, we are driving up the cost for somebody else. Is that being fair?
Sometimes what you have to do is re-examine an entire body of law and try to provide a uniform set of changes that will address how that law fits into changes in society or changes that have arisen with the time.
I don't like public easements. I I feel they are unfair to the landowners that maintain the road. Unless, you know, I believe in public easements for safety reasons only, emergency and safety reasons. I believe they should be maintained for that reason, but for everybody to just go up there and tear the road up, I think it's wrong.
Who will take responsibility here? Can an answer be found in the courts? With road law assuming that roads are good things, and environmental laws recognizing that sometimes they're not.
And so this is linked together both in terms of private rights and public rights. It's a public interest issue. Therefore, the government must look at this thing as a unique situation in which they address it differently. And if our courts are clogged up with these cases, or there's not adequate case law to address it, or our laws are not doing the job they should be doing, then at least let us try some form of mediation as a first step.
Mediation is a process in which a neutral person works with the parties in a dispute to try to arrive at a conclusion that suits all of their interests. Jonathan Reitman has been a neutral agent for 9 years after practicing law for 12 years in Brunswick.
If there are many erosion sites throughout Maine on many farm roads which are eroding and which are getting worse with time, and which therefore are going to be more expensive to fix as time goes on, it seems that it's in everyone's interest, the landowners, the towns, the state's interest, the environmental community's interest, to determine who is responsible for that erosion control as soon as possible, because the problem is just mushrooming and getting worse.
But could it work for the Manters? Does their commitment to the idea of setting legal precedent mean they've sacrificed their hope for peace in the Oak Hill Road Wars? Are they more committed to their idea of truth than to peace? Are they just troublemakers?
It's been very annoying. I live in Fayette, and I'm the former town manager there. And so I know how annoyed the townspeople are that the Manters have been obsessively carrying on this crusade.
I just feel he didn't want to go along with the law. He just was, what do you call it, nonconformist, you see, in more ways than one. They could have walked in.
I think that they are slowly but surely driving him insane over this road issue. I mean, the constant, well, we own the road, but we don't own the road. We own the road, but we don't own the road. I mean, you either own the road or you don't own the road. You can't have it both ways. It's not fair.
Linda McKee is the Manters' local state representative and a neighbor. She sponsored legislation they proposed.
No, I don't see them as troublemakers. I see them as persistent, frustrated landowners.
I don't think they can imagine their lives without having this. It has been central to their lives for 25 years.
I think that they have been on somewhat of a crusade all these years, and I'm not so sure that I wouldn't have felt the same way if I lived on a public easement as well.
I will throw out one caveat, which is if the party's real interest in a dispute like this is to do more than resolve their situation, but to set a precedent that every other person in the state of Maine who is similarly situated, as we lawyers say, who is in the same kind of situation, who finds themselves in the same kind of situation, that is, from their point of view, unfairly being asked to bear maintenance costs for other people's enjoyment of their property. If the interest of that party is to set a precedent that will govern everyone else in the state of Maine in the same situation, that kind of a precedent can really only be issued by a court of competent jurisdiction, and mediation is unlikely to be helpful in that situation.
All that he's done was fighting over this road. He just won't give up on the truth.
During the time I had in service, I not only had to fire upon civilians, because I never went overseas, but I had to take on a guard duty in this country that didn't require that I did, but I couldn't ask the other fellows that were my responsibility to fire on others. And I did. I know I've killed people doing that. The whole matter was covered up extremely well by those who wanted it done. I acted on behalf of a lie, of a country that won't represent itself in the truth. That's one of the reasons I fight so strongly about this road, because I want the people throughout this state, not just on this strip of land, to be able to purchase a piece of property and know in peace of mind that when they buy it, they're either going to be served by the public or it's going to be their own responsibility.
As Christians, we have a standard to live by, and we can't just let that standard go. When we see the court telling us something that's obviously contrary to the facts, if we just gave up and left, not only does it leave that lie being upheld, but it sets a bad precedent for other people who are in the same situation that we are. There are roads like this all over the state, and they've already used our case as precedent for some of those other roads. To be able to say that a public easement is a road that can be used by the public with no restrictions whatever, and nobody is responsible for maintaining it. And you cannot make anybody be responsible for maintaining it.
What would have to be done in order to make this situation not be a heartbreak to me, I don't know if I could actually say I'd be happy about it, I would have to have the court, as well, or at least someone, go over every detail of what took place from at least 1945 on to determine what could have legally been done. But first of all, the facts as they existed have to be known, and have to be known what they meant.
There could be a lot of forgiveness of a lot of this if people would just admit to having done wrong and say, what can we do to correct it? We realize the town probably doesn't have $60,000 to give us back. But if they would admit that they were wrong and advertise that they were wrong and say, look, we're trying to straighten things out, if they would make an effort, then I'm sure some kind of an agreement could be worked out.
People are willing, sometimes, given the right conditions, and with the right encouragement, to move past very deeply held beliefs, not asking them to sacrifice those beliefs in any way, but to put those aside and to still try to find some common interests. And I have seen it happen many, many times. And people in my work call it the magic of mediation. And it's when someone says, I may not agree with you, I still think that my belief is true and accurate, but I can see the point of view that you are bringing to the table. And here's what I'm willing to do to try to meet you in order to resolve this dispute, which has turned into litigation, which has turned into war.
And so the campfires of the Oak Hill Road Wars still smolder, and they may yet burst into flame. This is a very New England story. For here, not only did our farming population grow quickly and then decline sharply, but also these hills tend to breed a kind of principled determination, what some might call just plain cussedness. And there's a bigger story here too, a story about laws and government. Technology changes our world. Our values change, our choices change, but do our laws change as well? Exactly how much time, effort, and even suffering does it take to make them change? One thing is certain, and let us not forget it. Here in New England, it is our battle, as indeed it must be for all people whose Constitution begins with the words, "We the people," to ensure that whenever laws are made, forever and ever, to make them form a more perfect union.
I'd find me a spot, climbing some mountain top, with no one around me. Valleys and streams, birds in the trees, and hills that surround me. A place I could use, a place I could lose, a place I could use.